My mother changed the locks and threw my suitcase into the snow. "Get out. There's no place for you here anymore." My father just stood there in silence. Desperate, I pulled out the old ring my grandfather left me. A bank name was engraved on it. When I brought it to the bank, the manager went pale. "Ma'am, please sit down. You need to see this." I froze at what appeared on the screen. "I'm so glad you're here. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your country, your city. I want to know." A quick note. This story contains some fictional elements added for dramatic and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or settings is coincidental, but the message it carries, that part, is worth your time. The snow had been falling since noon. By the time I reached his study, the world had gone white and still. "Come in, Lena." The room smelled the way it always had: old paper, linseed oil. Something faintly sweet I'd never been able to name. Silas sat in his armchair beside the window, a cooling cup of tea at his elbow. He looked up and smiled. "You didn't tell your mother you were coming?" "She would have found a reason for me not to." Something moved through his expression. I noticed for the first time how much weight he'd lost since October. His collar sat loose. His hands were thinner than I remembered. I kept my face still. "Grandpa, how are you really feeling?" "Ah, tired," he said. "Not the kind that sleep fixes." He reached into the drawer and withdrew a ring. Copper tarnished, small, heavier than it looked. A plain band worn smooth. No gemstone, no ceremony. He held it toward me. "There's something inscribed inside," he said. "Don't look now. Look when you need to." His voice dropped. "Only use it when you have absolutely no one left to trust. Promise me." "You're frightening me, Grandpa." "I know, but I need to hear you say it." "I promise." He exhaled long, quiet, like a man setting something heavy down for good. We talked for 2 hours. He made me laugh. Outside, the snow kept falling in slow, indifferent spirals past the glass. When I stood to leave, he held my fingers closed around the ring just a moment longer than necessary, as if he needed to be certain I wouldn't let go. I thought he was being sentimental. I thought I had years left to understand. I was wrong about the years. Robert Calloway stood at the head of the table, briefcase, open papers neatly stacked. Silver-templed, precise, the kind of attorney who had decided long ago to keep all personal feelings behind a closed door. My mother, Elaine, sat at the far end in black wool spine, straight eyes dry. My father, Arthur, sat beside her, thick hands folded, staring at nothing. My uncle Marcus, whose primary relationship with money was owing it to people who frightened him, had taken the chair nearest the door. Julian sat across from me, 32. He hadn't spoken since I arrived. Robert read without expression. I noted the physician's attestation of cognitive competence dated 3 months before Silas's death, included with a specificity suggesting my grandfather had anticipated a challenge. Then, Silas Edward Hargrove bequeaths all tangible property, real estate, and physical assets to his granddaughter, Lena. Arthur's hands came apart on the table. Elaine drew a sharp breath. Marcus jolted in his chair. "He told me the plan wasn't finalized," Arthur said. "That is, the liquid balance," Elliot said carefully. "The immediately accessible funds held within the trust. It represents approximately 35% of your grandfather's total holdings." Elaine asked carefully about investments, savings, other assets. "I am not at liberty to discuss additional financial instruments at this time." Too precise to be accidental. I filed it away. Robert placed a sealed envelope in my hands. Dark red wax. Silas's handwriting, open only under duress. What followed was loud Arthur demanding a contest, Elaine requesting a private meeting, Marcus inching toward the door. I sat with the envelope in my lap and the ring in my pocket, thinking of my grandfather's voice. "Only when you have no one left to trust." I slipped the envelope away. I would open it in less than 2 weeks at a dinner table with everything about to be taken from me. 8 days after the reading, the atmosphere in the house had changed, felt, rather than seen the way you feel, weather pressure before clouds arrive. My mother moved through the corridors with new deliberateness. My father kept his office door shut from morning to evening. My uncle Marcus had installed himself in the east guest room without discussion, without invitation, without anyone naming the strangeness of it. I was returning from the kitchen that evening carrying tea. I had made more out of needing something to do with my hands than any real thirst when I heard Elaine's voice behind the closed office door. She was using the low-controlled register she reserved for conversations she wanted heard by exactly the right people, words muffled to shapes and rhythm. But I caught Marcus's name and numbers and the cadence of someone dictating terms rather than discussing them. I stopped walking. At the far end of the hallway, Mrs. Higgins stood near the linen closet. Margaret Higgins had worked in this house for 30 years. 65 with strong, capable hands and the practiced near invisibility of staff who know that the best way to move through a household is to disturb it as little as possible. She was not a woman who rattled easily. She was rattled now. She stood very still, a folded towel pressed to her chest, staring at the closed office door with an expression I had never seen on her face, the expression of someone carrying a burden grown too heavy, asking themselves whether they could put it down. "Mrs. Higgins," I said quietly. She was startled. "Perfectly fine, Miss Lena. Long day." The words came too fast, too smooth. For a moment, something moved across her face, compressed urgency like pressure behind glass. Her lips parted. Then she pressed them together and turned away. I noticed as she went that her hands were trembling. Just barely. Just enough. Behind the door, my mother's voice continued unhurried, confident, the voice of a woman who believed the game was already won. I took the copper ring from my pocket and held it in my palm. Only when you have no one left to trust. I curled my fingers around it and walked on. What I am about to tell you, I learned only later from Margaret herself and from Dr. Marsh, in pieces over the weeks that followed. But it matters that you understand what happened in that house while Silas was still alive. What I am about to tell you happened before the will reading, before any of it, while Silas was still alive, and the house still believed it was in control. I learned it afterward from Margaret and from Dr. Marsh in pieces over several weeks. But it matters that you understand what was done in that house while my grandfather was still breathing. The third night after Silas was admitted to hospital, Margaret Higgins could not sleep. At 65, sleep had become a negotiation. She lay in the staff room at the back of the ground floor, listening to the house settle, waiting for unconsciousness to arrive on its own terms. What pulled her upright at 11:43 was footsteps. Careful footsteps. The kind that tried very hard not to be footsteps at all. Margaret knew every sound this house made. 30 years had given her that. The creak of the third stair, the groan of the east corridor, the rattle of the north window in winter. These footsteps were moving toward the medicine cabinet outside Silas's bedroom, the one stocked by his physician, the one Margaret herself checked every Tuesday morning. She pulled on her housecoat and moved into the hallway. Silas's bedroom was dark. The medicine cabinet stood slightly open, light spilling from its interior bulb. And standing before it, wearing thin latex gloves, the pale color of old bone, was Elaine. Margaret stopped breathing. Elaine did not notice her. She was focused, entirely methodical, unhurried, terrifyingly calm, opening a prescription bottle with one hand while holding a second identical bottle in the other. She tilted the original and began transferring tablets one at a time, counting under her breath. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Elaine's voice from that morning cut through everything: your son's medical insurance. It would be a shame if something happened to it. She watched, motionless, watched until Elaine replaced the original bottle, tucked the second into her robe pocket, stripped the gloves with a soft snap, and walked away without a sound. Margaret stood in the dark until her legs steadied. Then she went to her room, picked up the phone, and dialed the number Silas had pressed into her hand 3 years ago. If anything ever happens that doesn't feel right, call her first. It rang 4 times. This is Dr. Marsh. Margaret closed her eyes. Doctor, she whispered. Something has happened. You need to come tonight. Morning arrived gray and cold. Margaret had not slept. She stood at the counter making breakfast with the mechanical precision of someone who needed routine to keep functioning, cracking eggs, whisking them, pretending her hands weren't still unsteady. She heard Elaine's footsteps on the stairs. Not the careful footsteps of last night. These were deliberate, unhurried, the footsteps of a woman who had slept well and woken with a plan. Elaine closed the kitchen door behind her, pulled out the chair directly across from Margaret, and sat close, deliberate, folding her hands on the tabletop. Good morning, Margaret. Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove. You look tired. A pause with weight in it. Margaret, 30 years with this family. You've never given me reason to question your discretion. I've always appreciated that. Deeply. Margaret said nothing. She kept her eyes on the bowl. Thomas is doing so well at his physical therapy. Elaine continued, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly, still warm, but with edges underneath. The specialists, the equipment, good insurance makes such a difference. Of course, that kind of coverage depends on continued employment. She stood, pushed her chair in with a soft, definitive click, and looked back from the doorway with an expression of perfect, practiced pleasantness. I know I can count on your discretion. The door swung closed. Margaret stood very still, her eyes stung. She pressed the back of her wrist against them, refusing to cry in this house where Elaine might see it as weakness. She was not weak. She was afraid, which was different. And she had already done what needed to be done. Last night, before fear could take hold, she had called Dr. Marsh. Marsh had arrived within the hour, had taken the tampered bottle away in a sealed evidence bag, had looked at Margaret across the hallway and said quietly, "You did the right thing. Now let me do the rest." Margaret picked up the fork. She finished the eggs. She made breakfast with steady hands and did not think about the sealed bottle with Elaine's fingerprints currently being logged into evidence. She thought about Thomas instead. The way he had laughed on the phone last Sunday. I want to tell you about Dr. Eleanor Marsh because she matters, and because she is the reason that everything that came later was able to hold up in a court of law. Eleanor Marsh was Silas's personal physician for the last 11 years of his life. She was in her late 50s, precise and unhurried in the way of doctors who have seen enough emergencies to stop being theatrical about them. Silas had chosen her specifically because she was, as he once told me with characteristic bluntness, the only physician I've met who tells me the truth without enjoying it. They had developed over more than a decade the kind of professional relationship that occasionally tips into something warmer, not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect deep enough to act as one. When Margaret Higgins called her at 11:53 on the night of December 3rd, Dr. Marsh was awake. She was always awake late. She arrived at the estate within 40 minutes, let herself in with the emergency key Silas had given her years earlier, and went directly to the second floor. I know what happened that night because Dr. Marsh told me herself weeks later in the measured and precise language she used for everything. She examined the medicine cabinet. She found the tampered bottle. The substituted tablets were not Silas's cardiac medication, but a compound designed to cause gradual deterioration of heart function, the kind that read on a death certificate as natural decline rather than intervention. She photographed the cabinet in situ before touching anything, using her phone in a sequence with timestamps. Then she did something that protected all of us in ways we could not yet anticipate. Rather than simply removing the tampered bottle, she documented its chain of custody, a legal term that refers to the unbroken record of who handled a piece of evidence, when and how, which determines whether that evidence can be admitted in a court proceeding. She sealed the tampered bottle in a sterile evidence bag, labeled it with the date, time, and her professional license number, and photographed herself doing it. She replaced the bottle's contents with Silas's correct medication. She then transported the sealed evidence to a state-accredited forensic laboratory, a certified facility capable of conducting admissible toxicological analysis, where it was logged under a protected pseudonym with my great-aunt Victoria, listed as the sole authorized release contact. Why Victoria? I asked her when she explained this to me. Because your grandfather asked me to, Dr. Marsh said simply. 6 months before all of this, he called me into his office and told me he had reason to believe someone close to him was considering something drastic. He gave me Victoria's name and told me she was the person to contact if the evidence ever needed to be moved. He was very calm about it. She paused. He had clearly been thinking about it for some time. She said it without drama, without outrage, the way she said most things. But I heard what she was not saying my grandfather had known. He had seen it coming with the same quiet, unflinching clarity with which he had seen most things in his life. And rather than confronting it or running from it, he had built a wall of documented, legally airtight evidence around me and waited. He had protected me from beyond the reach of his own life. My eyes burned when I understood that. I pressed my fingers hard against my eyelids and breathed through my mouth until the burning subsided, and when I opened my eyes again, Dr. Marsh was watching me with an expression of professional compassion, the kind that does not try to fix grief, only acknowledges it. He was very fond of you, she said. He mentioned you often. I nodded because speaking was not available to me at that particular moment. The chain of custody, she continued, returning to the facts because facts were her ground, is unbroken and fully documented. Everything will hold in court. I made certain of it. That was Silas even then, even in the act of being slowly, deliberately poisoned, making certain. 2 weeks after my grandfather's funeral, my mother set the dining table with white candles and the good silverware, which in this family had always been a weapon dressed as hospitality. The room looked beautiful. She had arranged fresh flowers, white roses, Silas's least favorite, in the centerpiece, and the candles threw warm amber light across the walls, and the whole setting had the deliberate elegance of a performance whose audience was only me. Arthur sat at his usual place, freshly pressed, his hands folded with the careful stillness of a man bracing for impact. Julian sat across from me, and when I caught his eye, he looked away immediately, dropping his gaze to the table, and my stomach tightened. "I'm so glad we're doing this," Elaine said, unfolding her napkin across her lap with a practiced flourish. "It's been such a difficult few weeks. We all need to come together." I said nothing and reached for my water glass. "Lena." Her voice shifted just slightly, just enough. The warmth was still there, but thinner now, like lacquer over something harder. "I need to talk to you about something that's become very urgent." "Go ahead," I said. She glanced at Arthur, who cleared his throat. "Your father's development project," he began, and immediately I understood from the way he said it. Not my project, but your father's project. Already distancing himself from it, that this had been rehearsed. The Meridian project. It collapsed. Completely. The financing fell through, the contractors have filed liens, and the bank is calling in the notes. He paused as if waiting for me to say something sympathetic. I waited instead. "We're looking at $4.2 million, Elaine said, stepping in smoothly, her voice dropping to something softer, something calculated to suggest vulnerability. "In outstanding loans and penalties, and Arthur is facing possible criminal charges for breach of fiduciary duty to his investors if we can't demonstrate good faith repayment within 30 days. "Criminal charges," I repeated. "It could mean prison." Her chin trembled just slightly, perfectly timed. "For your father, Lena. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "I understand what you're saying," I said. "Tell me what you want." She spread her hands on the table, a gesture of helplessness so theatrical it made me want to push back from the table entirely. "We need you to sign a power of attorney, temporary, just long enough to use the estate as collateral against the debt, to buy your father time." I looked at Arthur. He was studying the table. I looked at Julian. He raised his eyes to mine for exactly 1/2 second, just long enough to say without words, without any possibility of Elaine noticing, "No, do not sign anything." My heart rate spiked and then strangely steadied. "I'll need to think about it," I said. Elaine smiled warm relief, just slightly too fast. "Of course, sweetheart, of course." But I was already thinking about the sealed envelope in my coat pocket, and the ring on my finger, and the voice of a man who had known this moment was coming, only when you have no one left to trust. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the darkness of my childhood bedroom with the sealed envelope on the pillow beside me, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about my grandfather, not the Silas of the past 3 weeks. The one everyone was eulogizing and grieving and arguing about, but the Silas of that last afternoon in his study. The way he had handed me the ring without ceremony. The way he had held my hands closed around it. The absolute quiet certainty in his eyes, which I understood now, was not the certainty of a dying man making peace with things he could not control. It was the certainty of a man who had already controlled them. I opened the envelope at 6:47 in the morning. Inside was a single folded sheet of heavy paper, notarized, stamped, and signed by both Silas and Robert Calloway. It was a legal instrument called a trustee verification clause, a provision attached to the estate documents specifying that any transfer of assets bearing my signature required independent review and confirmation by Robert Calloway in his capacity as trustee attorney within 72 hours of signing. If Robert determined that the signature had been obtained under duress, intimidation, or undue influence, he was legally authorized under the terms of the trust to void the transaction entirely and place all assets in protective freeze pending court review. In plain language, my grandfather had made it legally impossible for anyone to force me to sign anything without Robert finding out. I read it twice. I read it a third time to be certain I understood. Then I went downstairs. The dining room smelled of last night's candles, cold wax, and flowers. Elaine was already seated with her coffee composed and expectant, dressed in a cashmere sweater the color of mourning. Arthur sat beside her, and Marcus had appeared from somewhere to lean against the far wall with his arms crossed, which told me the whole thing had been staged to feel like an intervention. I sat down across from Elaine and placed the open document on the table between us. She looked at it. Her eyes moved across the text with the quick, controlled focus of someone who reads things fast when they need to, and as she read, I watched the expression on her face travel a small, telling distance from certainty to confusion to something colder and more calculating that she covered almost immediately. "This is a legal instrument attached to Grandpa's estate documents," I said. "It means Robert reviews any signature I produce on asset transfer paperwork within 72 hours. If he determines I signed under pressure of any kind, he voids the transaction immediately." I looked directly at her. "So I'd encourage you to call him before you ask me again." Elaine set down her coffee cup very carefully. "Lena," Arthur started. "Call Robert," I said again and did not move. The silence that followed was not empty. It crackled with the specific electric quality of a room in which someone's plan has just been dismantled in front of them. Elaine's jaw was tight, her fingers curled around her coffee cup, and then released it. Marcus pushed off the wall and straightened, shifting his weight. Then Elaine smiled at me. It was the smile I had feared most since childhood. Not the angry one, not the wounded one, but the specific smile that meant she was already 3 moves ahead, and none of them would be pleasant. "Of course," she said softly. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll figure something else out." That evening, I heard Marcus on his phone in the east hallway, his voice too low to catch the words. And I felt with the particular cold clarity that fear gives you when it bypasses panic and goes straight to instinct that whatever came next would be worse. I was right. It happened at 11 o'clock that night. I was in my room reading when I heard the knock, 3 hard raps on my bedroom door, the kind that are not asking for entry so much as announcing it. Before I could stand, the door swung open and Marcus filled the frame. He was not a small man, and he used the fact of his size deliberately the way people do when they want to make a room feel smaller than it is. He did not say a word. He reached past me, grabbed the handle of my suitcase from beside the wardrobe, and hurled it into the hallway. "What are you doing?" I demanded, surging to my feet. He turned and walked back toward the stairs without answering. I stood in the middle of my room, heart hammering, and then Elaine's voice rose from the bottom of the staircase, not elevated with anger, not theatrical, just clear and carrying, and absolutely final. "Take your grandfather's trash and get out of my house." My stomach dropped. My vision went sharp at the edges the way it does when your body understands something a half second before your mind catches up. I stood there for one full suspended breath, and then something settled in my chest. Not calm exactly, but the thing that comes after the bottom falls out, and you realize you are still standing. I walked into the hallway. My suitcase was on its side near the top of the staircase. I picked it up. I walked down the stairs. Arthur was in the hallway at the bottom, standing beside the wall with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes turned toward the floor. He did not look at me. He did not speak. He simply stood there in the particular posture of a man who has decided that the absence of action is not the same thing as complicity, and who is wrong about that. I walked past him without speaking. There was nothing to say to a man who had chosen at the moment that mattered most to become furniture. Elaine stood in the doorway of the sitting room as I crossed the entry hall. She watched me go with her arms folded and her chin lifted. "You were never going to be enough for any of this," she said, not loudly. "Not with anger the way you say something you have believed for a long time and no longer need to perform." Then, as I reached the door, "Take your grandfather's trash and get out of my house." The front door was heavy. I pushed it open with one hand and stepped out into the night. The cold hit me like a physical thing, sharp, immediate winter cold with teeth in it. Snow was falling in the yellow glow of the porch light, soft and indifferent. I stood on the stone step, suitcase in hand, and I heard the door close behind me. The lock engaged with a single precise click. I breathed in, out. The cold air burned the back of my throat. I put my free hand in my coat pocket. The ring was there, small and solid and warm in a way that made no physical sense. I held it for a moment. Then I picked up my suitcase and walked toward my car. Only when you have no one left to trust. I had nobody left. The engine idled in the dark. I had pulled over 3 blocks from the estate and sat with both hands gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at a stretch of empty winter street. Snow drifting through the cone of a street lamp pavement, glistening black beneath it, not another soul in sight. The heater was running, but the car had not warmed yet, and I could see my own breath misting in front of my face, short and shallow, the visible proof that I was still breathing even though everything inside me felt suspended. I had been thrown out of my own grandfather's house, the house he had left to me, by the woman who had spent 30 years making me believe that her approval was the same thing as oxygen necessary and entirely within her power to withhold. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the steering wheel to stop it, and breathed in through my nose, slow and deliberate, the way you do when panic is circling and you need to keep it from landing. Think. Think clearly. What do you have? A suitcase with 2 days of clothing, a phone with 40% battery, $112 in my checking account, and a copper ring that a dying man had pressed into my hands with an intensity I had not understood until this moment. I pulled the ring from my coat pocket. It caught the light from the street lamp outside, a dim reddish gleam along its worn surface, the patina of something very old and very deliberately made. I turned it over in my fingers, remembering his words. "There's something inscribed on the inside of the band. Don't look now. Look when you need to." I needed to. I angled the ring toward the light and looked at the inside of the band. The engraving was small, almost impossibly small, carved with a precision that must have required specialized tools, the kind of work that was done intentionally and expensively. Two sets of numbers separated by a dash. I recognized the format immediately: geographic coordinates, and beneath them, three letters CNT. My heart began to beat differently. I typed the coordinates into my phone with fingers that were no longer entirely steady. The map loaded. A pin dropped on a street in the old financial district 4 miles from where I was sitting. The label that appeared beneath the pin read, Cumberland National Trust Private Banking Division. I stared at the screen. Then I looked at the three letters on the inside of the ring, CNT, Cumberland National Trust. Of course. A sound came out of me, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Something caught between the two, compressed and raw, the sound of a person who has just realized that the person they are grieving was even in dying more present and more prepared than anyone around them had ever understood. I checked the hours. The branch opened at 9 in the morning. I looked at the dashboard clock. 12:41 a.m., 8 hours and 19 minutes. I reclined the seat as far as it would go, pulled my coat up over my shoulders like a blanket, and closed my eyes. Sleep was not possible, I knew that before I tried. But I could lie still. I could breathe. I could hold the ring in my closed fist against my chest and feel the weight of it, the warmth it held, the impossible, solid fact of it. He had known this night was coming. He had prepared for it years before it arrived. I was not, it turned out, as alone as the sound of that closing lock had made me feel. At 1:58 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID, no area code. I recognized just a string of digits, and below them a text message that contained nothing but 3 periods in a row. 3 dots. Then nothing. My breath caught in my chest. Julian had invented that signal when we were children, a code we used to pass notes in church when our mother's attention was elsewhere. 3 dots meaning, I see you, I'm here, pay attention. I had not seen it in years. I had begun to believe in the slow accumulation of recent months that my brother had simply stopped seeing me. I sat up. I typed back, where? The response came in under a minute, 5th and Marchment. All-night diner, blue awning. I started the car. The diner was the kind of place that exists specifically for people who have nowhere else to be at 2 in the morning. A narrow room with vinyl booths, fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly ill, and a coffee smell so deeply embedded in the walls it had become structural. A woman in her 60s worked the counter with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had seen every variety of human difficulty slide through that door and had made peace with all of it. Julian was in the booth at the far back facing the entrance. He had always sat facing the entrance ever since we were teenagers. I used to tease him about it. I slid in across from him. He looked at me, at my coat still dusted with snow, at the suitcase I'd left visible in the car outside, at whatever was showing on my face, and something moved through his expression that looked very much like guilt and very much like relief at the same time. They did it tonight, he said. Not a question. An hour ago, I said. He exhaled hard through his nose and pressed both hands flat on the table in front of him. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small black USB drive on the table between us. 3 months of work. He said, his voice low and tightly controlled. Every illegal transaction Marcus ran through the family accounts. Wire transfers, offshore shell companies, dates, amounts. Elaine's authorization signatures on each one. He paused. I installed a keylogger on Arthur's home office computer 6 months ago. It records every keystroke. They never swept for it. I stared at the drive. Then I looked up at my brother and my chest ached in a way I had not expected, not from the revelation, but from the realization of what it meant. He had been in that house surrounded by those people for months, playing a role, carrying this. Julian, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. Are you safe? He picked up his coffee cup. His jaw tightened slightly. "For now," he said. "As long as they think I'm still on their side." He met my eyes. "Go to the bank, Lena. First thing in the morning. Take the ring. Everything else starts there." He pushed the USB an inch closer to me. "And take this. Robert needs to see it, but not yet. Not until the time is right." I picked up the drive and closed my fingers around it. Across the table, my brother looked at me with tired eyes, and something that had survived somehow all the years of being made to feel like loving me was a weakness. "I never stopped," he said, and I knew without asking what he meant. My eyes burned. I pressed my knuckles hard against my mouth for a moment, and then I nodded because words were not available, and he understood. Victoria Hargrove lived 40 minutes outside the city, in a house that was the architectural opposite of the estate. Small, low-ceilinged, crowded with books and plants, and the particular comfortable disorder of a person who has decided that beauty matters more than presentation. She was 70 years old, Silas's younger sister by 4 years, and she had the same jaw, the same quality of stillness, the same eyes that seemed to be looking slightly past the surface of whatever they were examining. I had always loved her. My mother had always been careful to limit my time with her, which I now understood was not coincidence. I had not called ahead. I drove there directly from the diner, arriving just after 3 in the morning, and I stood on her porch in the snow and knocked, feeling faintly absurd and entirely desperate. The light inside came on within 30 seconds. The door opened within a minute. Victoria stood in the doorway in a quilted robe, her gray hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked at me, at the snow on my coat, at the suitcase handle I was gripping at my face, and she did not look surprised. "I've been expecting you," she said. "Come in." The kitchen was warm. She put a kettle on without asking, and I sat at the round table in the center of the room and pressed my cold hands flat against the wooden surface and tried to stop shaking. "How long?" I asked. She placed a mug in front of me and sat down across the table, folding her hands around her own cup. "Your grandfather called me 8 months ago," she said. "He told me he suspected someone was altering his medication. Not a suspicion born of confusion or fear. Silas was never confused or afraid. A clinical considered suspicion based on observable changes in how he felt after taking his evening doses." She looked at me steadily. "He asked me to help him document it in a way that would be legally defensible. He was very specific about that word. Defensible." She slid a thick envelope across the table toward me. I opened it. Inside, a formal service agreement between Silas and Dr. Eleanor Marsh, dated 8 months ago, a set of laboratory intake forms from a state-accredited forensic facility, a chain of custody document, a legal record tracking exactly who handled the evidence, when, where, and how, establishing an unbroken line of accountability that a court could verify, and a set of toxicological analysis results that made my stomach turn completely over when I read them. The substance Elaine introduced into his medication causes progressive cardiac degradation. Victoria said, her voice careful and even. "It is designed to look like natural deterioration. It would have been invisible on a standard autopsy." She paused. Dr. Marsh intercepted it before the damage became irreversible. Silas had enough of his correct medication to remain clear-headed for the final 2 months of his life. Her eyes met mine. Long enough to finish everything he needed to finish. My hands were trembling against the envelope. My throat had closed down to almost nothing. I thought of the physician's attestation in his will, the one certifying full cognitive competence dated 3 months before his death, and understood now why he had insisted on it with such precision. "He knew he was being poisoned," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth. Wrong-shaped for the world. "He knew," Victoria confirmed. "And he made absolutely certain that they could not get away with it." I pressed both hands over my face. Behind my palms, my eyes were burning so fiercely I could feel the heat of them against my skin. I breathed in and out and in again, and when I lowered my hands, my great aunt was watching me with the particular steadiness of someone who has been waiting for a very long time to be able to help. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You go to the bank," she said, "and then you let Silas's plan finish what he started." The building did not look like a bank. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled into the small, unmarked lot behind the address the coordinates had led me to, in the old financial district on a block of 19th century stone buildings that the rest of the city had gentrified past and forgotten. Cumberland National Trust occupied a corner building with marble columns and brass-framed windows that had the deliberate gravity of an institution that did not need to advertise. There was no large sign. There was a small brass plate beside the door engraved with the name and nothing else. It was 9:04 in the morning. I had not slept. I had changed clothes in a gas station bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and spent the drive over practicing what I was going to say. I had not come up with anything satisfactory. In the end, I simply walked in. The interior was dim and wood-paneled, smelling of beeswax polish and something faintly floral, and almost entirely quiet. A receptionist in her 50s sat behind a mahogany desk near the entrance, composed, well-dressed with the specific kind of professional warmth that is genuinely meant but also carefully calibrated. She looked up when I entered. "Good morning," she said. "How can we help you today?" I reached into my coat pocket and placed the copper ring on the desk between us. She looked at it. Something happened in her expression, not shock, not confusion, but a very precise form of recognition, the kind that comes from having been trained to respond to a specific thing. She looked up at me. "One moment, please," she said, and lifted the phone on her desk. She spoke quietly with her back angled slightly away from me, and then she replaced the receiver and came around the desk. "If you'll follow me," she said. She led me not to a standard consultation room, but down a short hallway lined with framed engravings, historical documents, letters, architectural drawings, and through a door at the end into a room that was nothing like the sparse efficiency of a modern bank. This was a private room, dark wood paneling, heavy drapes, leather chairs, a desk that had clearly been made in a century before this one. A room designed for conversations that mattered. On the desk sat a small device I did not immediately recognize, a flat disc-shaped reader with a circular depression at its center, approximately the diameter of a finger ring. A man entered from a side door. He was somewhere in his late 40s, lean and composed, with the deliberate unhurriedness of someone accustomed to dealing with sensitive matters without drama. He introduced himself as Elliot Hayes, branch manager of the private banking division, the section of Cumberland National Trust that handled legacy accounts, trust instruments, and estate arrangements that required a level of confidentiality exceeding standard banking practice. "Miss Hargrove," he said, and his voice was neither warm nor cold, simply present and attentive. "Your grandfather contacted us 11 years ago to establish an account of a particular type. Before we proceed, I'll need to verify your identity and confirm the authentication instrument." He nodded toward the ring in my hand. "If you're ready." My mouth was dry. My heart was beating in my ears. I placed the ring into the depression on the reader. The device hummed softly. A light moved across its surface, blue, then green, and on the screen of the laptop beside it, text appeared. "Hargrove Legacy Trust. Beneficiary: Lena Claire Hargrove. Status active." My legs went unsteady beneath me. I put one hand on the back of the nearest chair to keep myself upright. "Please," Elliot Hayes said quietly, "sit down. Before I reveal the number that appeared on that screen, type 63 in the comments so I know you're still here with me, because what came up on that screen was the last thing I expected, and it changed everything." A note before we continue: this story contains some fictional elements crafted for storytelling purposes. If that's not what you came for, This is your moment to step away. Elliot Hayes did not make me wait. He settled into the chair across the desk, opened the laptop so the screen faced me, and navigated to the account summary with the measured efficiency of someone who had done this before, who had sat across from people in this room at moments like this, and knew that the kindest thing was to let the information arrive without ceremony. The screen showed a dashboard, account details, asset categories, and at the top beneath my name and the trust designation a single number, $63,842,000. I stared at it. The digits sat on the screen with the absolute indifference of numbers which do not know or care what they mean to the person reading them. I read them again. I read them a third time. My brain kept performing the same operation and arriving at the same result, and the result kept failing to become real. That's... I stopped. Started again. That's the balance. I looked up from the screen. 35%. The trust also encompasses commercial real estate holdings in 3 counties. He continued, his voice steady and unhurried, as though delivering news of this magnitude was a thing that required steadiness above all else. Equity positions in 2 private firms and a land portfolio totaling approximately 400 acres across 2 states. He paused. Total asset value conservatively estimated falls between $80 and $95 million depending on current market valuations. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the arms of the chair. My parents told me he had nothing, I said. My voice came out unsteady, cracked in the middle of the sentence. They told me he lived on Social Security, that he couldn't help me even if he wanted to, that he'd spent everything, that there was nothing left, that... I stopped because my throat had seized completely. My eyes filled so fast I had no time to prevent it, heat flooding upward vision, blurring the physical revolt of a body that has just absorbed the full weight of a decade of deliberate lies. Elliot Hayes did not look away. He did not pretend not to see. He simply sat patient and present, and let me have the moment without filling it with reassurances that would have made it worse. I pressed the back of my hand hard against my eyes. I breathed. I breathed again. He hid it, I said when I could speak. From them. Very deliberately, Elliot confirmed. The trust was structured specifically to be invisible to standard estate searches. It does not appear in any public record. Your grandfather worked with Robert Calloway and our institution for over a decade to ensure that. He looked at me with something that was not quite sympathy, but was close to it, the careful compassion of a professional who understands that his job sometimes involves handing people things that break them open before they can heal. He wanted to be certain that when the time came there would be something left that they could not touch. Something left that they could not touch. I looked back at the screen, at the number that sat there, patient and enormous, waiting for me, the way my grandfather had been waiting quietly, privately, with 30 years of love and 30 years of foresight. My hands were shaking, my face was wet. And somewhere underneath the shock and the grief and the staggering, vertiginous disorientation of finding out that everything you were told was a lie, underneath all of that, something was beginning to wake up. Something that felt for the first time in a very long time like the beginning of solid ground. Elliot Hayes left the room briefly and returned with a flat archival box, the kind used to store documents that need to be preserved, acid-free, sealed with a label on the side in my grandfather's handwriting that read, simply, "For Lena, when she is ready." He placed it on the desk between us and did not open it. Your grandfather asked that you review these privately at your own pace, he said. I'll be just outside if you need anything. He closed the door quietly behind him. I sat for a moment looking at the box. My hands were still not entirely steady. I pressed them flat on the desk surface, felt the solidity of it, and then reached forward and lifted the lid. Inside, arranged in chronological order with paper clips and handwritten date labels, were letters. Dozens of them, spanning 11 years. Each one was addressed to me in my grandfather's looping, unhurried script. Each one bore a date, and in the upper right corner a small notation sent or not, delivered depending on what had happened to it after he wrote it. The ones marked not delivered outnumbered the others 4-1. I picked up the first one. My fingers were trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. "My dear Lena," it began, "I've written to you twice now without receiving a reply. I've started to suspect your parents aren't passing my letters along. I hope I'm wrong. I miss you terribly. And I'm not sure what I've done to make you stop writing, but I want you to know that whatever it is, we can talk about it. You are my granddaughter, and I love you without conditions. Please write back." My hand flew to my mouth. I read it again and again. The words blurred and sharpened and blurred again. I reached for the next one. "My dear Lena, I asked your mother today if I could call you directly, and she said you had requested not to hear from me. I don't believe that's true, but I am going to respect it for now in case I'm wrong. I want you to know I think about you every day." And another, I tried calling the number I had for you, and it's been disconnected. I've sent 3 letters this month. I don't know if any of them are reaching you. I've started to understand that they are not. Please know wherever you are that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. A sound came out of me that I did not recognize as my own voice, at first low and broken and wrenched from somewhere deeper than my chest. I pressed both hands over my face and bent forward in the chair and sobbed with the particular violence of someone releasing something that has been held too long and too tightly. My shoulders shook. My breath came in jagged, ugly pulls. The tears ran through my fingers and dripped onto the open letter in my lap, blurring the ink of words that had been waiting 11 years to reach me. He had not forgotten me. He had never forgotten me. He had written to me over and over and over, and she had taken every letter, every call, every attempt, and she had simply made them disappear. I don't know how long I sat like that. Long enough for the room to go quiet around me in a way that felt respectful rather than empty. Long enough for the worst of it to pass through and leave behind something that was not peace, but was at least honest, the clean, raw grief of knowing the truth after years of living inside a carefully constructed lie. When I finally straightened, I picked up the last letter in the box. It was dated 4 months before he died. "My dear Lena, I have stopped trying to send these, but I haven't stopped writing them because I find that the writing itself keeps me company. I want you to know that I am not angry. I understand more than they realize. I have been making arrangements. By the time you read this, and you will read this, I am certain of it, you will understand what I mean. I love you. I have never stopped. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Love, Grandpa." I held the letter against my chest for a long moment, eyes closed, jaw tight, the paper warm from my hands. Then I looked up at the ceiling, breathed in once deep and deliberate, and reached forward to press the small button on the desk that would bring Elliot Hayes back into the room. There was more to understand, and I was ready. Elliot returned, and behind him someone I had not expected. Robert Calloway walked into the room. Not the Robert Calloway of the estate's parlor, the precise armored professional who had read my grandfather's will with the emotional register of a man reciting a grocery list. This Robert Calloway moved differently. His shoulders were lower. The careful rigidity he had always carried like a second suit of clothing was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like relief. Like a person who has been holding a very long breath and has finally been told they can exhale. He crossed the room and extended his hand. The handshake was nothing like the ones I remembered from formal meetings, those careful, correct, professionally calibrated grips. This was warmer, longer, the grip of someone who has wanted to say something for a very long time and has only just been given permission. "Welcome back, Miss Lena," he said quietly. "Your grandfather would be extraordinarily proud." I looked at him. "You knew," I said. "You knew the whole time." Every detail, Robert said. He sat down across from me, set his briefcase on the desk, and folded his hands. Your grandfather retained me privately 22 years ago, not as the Hargrove family attorney, but as your attorney. Your interests alone. Everything I appeared to do on behalf of the family was a performance carefully maintained to avoid alerting your mother to the fact that the legal infrastructure she assumed she could eventually manipulate had been arranged from its foundation to protect you. I stared at him. My mind was moving backward through everything I thought I had known about this man, every cold reading of documents, every neutral expression, every carefully worded non-answer, and reinterpreting all of it. The way you behaved at the will reading, I said slowly, designed to give your mother the impression that I was indifferent, Robert confirmed. If she believed I was simply a neutral executor of documents, she would not suspect that I was actively working against her plans. He looked at me with directness that was entirely unlike his professional mask. It was the hardest role I have ever played. There were moments in that parlor when what I wanted to do was look at you and tell you it was going to be all right. I could not. Any deviation from the performance would have put you at greater risk. My throat tightened sharply. And the envelope, the one you gave me at the reading. Your grandfather's instructions. He anticipated that Elaine would move quickly once the will was read. He wanted you to have a legal instrument ready before she made her first move. He paused. He was right about the timing. He generally was. I looked down at the archival box of letters still open on the desk in front of me. My grandfather had written to me for 11 years. He had retained a lawyer for me for 22. He had designed a biometric ring, a trust structure, a chain of evidence, a legal safety net, all of it quietly, privately, without anyone knowing over decades. Why didn't he just tell me? The question came out before I could stop it, raw and honest and slightly helpless. Why didn't he call me himself or find a way to reach me directly? Robert's expression shifted. Something in it was genuinely sorry. He tried, he said, many times. Your mother was extremely thorough about preventing contact. Eventually, he decided that direct outreach was too likely to trigger a preemptive response from Elaine, that if she realized how much planning he had done, she might act before everything was in place. He met my eyes. He chose to protect the plan over protecting you from the pain of believing he had forgotten you. He told me once that it was the decision he hated most in all of this. Robert's voice lowered. He said he hoped you would forgive him for it. My eyes burned again. I pressed my lips together hard. There's nothing to forgive, I said when I trusted my voice. Tell me what comes next. Robert opened his briefcase. There is a video, he said. The tablet Robert placed on the desk was slim and new, and it seemed strange to me somehow that this final message from a man who ate canned soup for lunch and wore the same sweater for 20 years had been recorded onto a piece of sleek, modern technology. But then, I was still in the process of dismantling everything I thought I had known about him. The recording is encrypted. Robert explained, opening the file with a password I did not see him enter. It was designed to be inaccessible until the trust account had been authenticated. Your grandfather wanted to ensure that whoever received this message had already completed the necessary steps, that they were, in his words, in a position of strength, not desperation. He turned the tablet to face me. He recorded 3 sections. This is the first. He pressed play and stepped back. The screen filled with my grandfather's face. He was sitting in his study. I recognized the bookshelves behind him, the particular angle of light from the north-facing window, the corner of the armchair he had sat in for as long as I could remember. He looked older than the last time I had seen him in person. The weight had continued to fall away from his frame, and his hands resting in his lap were thinner than the hands I remembered closing mine around a copper ring. But his eyes were exactly the same, sharp, present, deliberate, looking directly into the camera with an attention that reached through the screen and made the room feel very small and very quiet. My dear Lena, he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered, aged, slightly slower, but its quality was unchanged. The unhurried certainty of it. The refusal to perform emotion for an audience. If you are watching this, you have done exactly what I hoped. You used the ring. You went to the bank. You found your way. He paused. I am more proud of you for that than I can adequately express, and I have always been better with plans than with words. So I will simply say it plainly, you have done well. My fingers curled tight around the edge of the desk. I need to explain some things, he continued. Not to excuse the choices I made, some of them caused you pain, and I know that, and I am sorry for it. But to make sure you understand what you are walking into and why I built it the way I did. He looked into the camera, and the directness of it made my chest ache sharply because it was so purely him. No softening, no performance, just the clean, honest truth of a person who had always believed you deserved it. I knew for a long time what your mother was capable of. I watched what she did to you over the years, the slow, careful work of making you small, of convincing you that her approval was something you needed to survive. He leaned forward slightly. It is not, he said. It never was. And the moment you understand that completely, the moment it lives in your bones rather than just your head, there is nothing they can do to you. The screen went dark. I sat very still, staring at the black rectangle of the tablet, my jaw tight, my eyes hot and full, my hands pressing so hard into the desk that my knuckles had gone white. There are 2 more sections, Robert said quietly. They unlock as subsequent stages are completed. I nodded. I could not speak. I turned my face away from him for a moment toward the window and breathed through the burning in my throat until it subsided enough. There is nothing they can do to you. I was going to need to hear that many more times before I believed it completely. But I was beginning. I left the bank at noon with a manila folder of documents under my arm, and Robert Calloway's direct number saved in my phone, and for approximately 40 minutes I allowed myself to feel something close to hope. Then my phone lit up. The email address was one I didn't recognize, a string of random characters, the kind used by people who do not want to be traced. The subject line was blank. The body of the message contained 11 words. You stole something that belongs to us. Call us immediately. My stomach plummeted. I forwarded the email to Robert before I had even finished reading it, then called him directly. He answered on the second ring. I've seen it, he said. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge receipt. Document everything, screenshot it with a timestamp, and send it to me. How did they know I was at the bank? I demanded. My voice came out harder than I intended, sharp with the anger that was easier to feel right now than the fear underneath it. I didn't tell anyone except Julian and Victoria. Neither of them told her, Robert said with the certainty of someone who had already considered and dismissed the possibility. There was a breach at the bank's level. A staff member who should not have had access to your account flag reported your arrival to a third party. We're looking into it now. A staff member. Someone had been paid or threatened or both to watch for my name and report it. I looked up from my phone and through the windshield at the parking lot around me, and my breath stopped. 3 rows ahead in the far corner of the lot, a dark sedan was parked with its engine running. Tinted windows. No visible driver. It had not been there when I arrived. Robert, I said carefully. There's a car in the parking lot. Dark sedan, running engine, tinted windows. It was not here when I walked in. A brief pause. Can you get the plate? I took a photo through the windshield, trying to keep the motion casual, unhurried, as though I were simply checking something on my phone, rather than documenting the vehicle that might be documenting me. I sent it. Private investigator, Robert said after 30 seconds. The registration is a shell company, but it's a shell company we've seen used before, in cases involving pressure and surveillance. Your mother has retained someone. The anger in my chest compressed into something colder and more focused. She's having me watched. She wants footage, Robert said, of you appearing unstable, distressed, behaving erratically. Anything she can use to support a narrative of mental incompetence. His voice was careful and precise. Which means you cannot give her that. Whatever you feel, and I understand, you are feeling a great deal. Right now, you cannot let it show in a public space where a camera might be pointed at you. I looked at the sedan. The sedan sat motionless, a dark rectangle in the winter light, its engine breathing exhaust into the cold air. I raised my phone, took a clear photograph of the vehicle at full zoom, and sent it to Robert. Then I looked directly at the sedan steadily, calmly, without expression for a count of 3 seconds. Let whoever was behind those windows understand that I saw them, that I was not surprised, that I was not afraid. I started my car. Whatever she was planning, she was going to find that I was no longer the person she had thrown out that door. Julian chose the meeting place, a coffee shop 2 miles from the estate, the kind of neighborhood spot that was too quiet to attract attention, and busy enough that 2 people sitting at a corner table looked unremarkable. He was there before me, seated with his back to the wall, always the wall, always, the entrance in his line of sight with a coffee he hadn't touched, and his phone face down on the table. I sat across from him. He looked at me with the careful attention of someone who is assessing damage, the same way a doctor looks at a patient before asking questions. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm functional," I said. "Tell me what you know." He turned his phone face up and slid it across the table. On the screen was a screenshot of a text exchange, Elaine's number at the top, Marcus's below it. The messages were short and clinical, the language stripped of everything except logistics. "Find out where she's staying. Find out what she knows. We move before the end of the week." My jaw tightened. "When was this?" "This morning," Julian said. 2 hours after you left the bank." He pulled the phone back. "They know you went there. They know something happened inside that building that changed the situation. They don't know the details yet, but Elaine is smart enough to understand that if you walked out of Cumberland National Trust, looking the way you apparently looked, the landscape has shifted significantly." "What else?" He leaned forward, forearms on the table, voice dropping. "She's preparing a legal filing. I overheard her on the phone with an attorney last night. Not Robert, a different one. Someone she has apparently been cultivating for a situation exactly like this." His eyes were steady on mine, and I could see the effort it cost him to say the next part without letting the anger into his voice. "She's going to claim that you exploited Silas while his cognitive capacity was diminished. Elder financial abuse. It's a criminal allegation in most states, and it triggers an automatic investigation." The words landed in my chest like something physical. "She's going to call me a criminal," I said. "She's going to try to make you into one before you can make her into one," Julian said. "It's preemptive. If she files first and generates enough noise, she controls the narrative." He looked at me. "She has been planning this since before the will was read. Probably since before Grandpa died. She knew he might do something like this, and she has been preparing a countermove for months." I sat with that for a moment. The coffee shop hummed softly around us. Steam wands, low conversation, the clink of cups, the absolute ordinary texture of a world that had no idea what was happening at this corner table. "She doesn't know about the letters," I said, "or the medical evidence, or the keylogger data." "No," Julian said. "She thinks she's holding all the cards." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "Grandpa spent 30 years letting her think exactly that." I looked at my brother, this person who had sat at that dinner table and pretended night after night to be someone he wasn't, all to protect a plan that had been set in motion before either of us fully understood what we were part of. "When this is over," I said, "I am going to need to apologize to you, properly, for the years I thought you had given up on me." Julian picked up his coffee cup. His throat moved. "You don't owe me an apology." He said, his voice slightly rough. "You owe me a proper dinner. Somewhere without surveillance." He met my eyes. Go to Robert tonight. Tell him everything you have. Let him start building the response. His jaw set. It's time to stop being on defense. I nodded. I agreed, absolutely time. The envelope arrived at 7:14 in the morning. Robert had arranged for me to stay in a small hotel 4 blocks from his office. Nothing remarkable, just clean and safe and unknown to my mother. And I was sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand when he knocked. He did not call ahead. The fact that he came in person before 8 in the morning told me everything I needed to know about what he was carrying before he opened his briefcase. He placed the documents on the small table by the window and stood back. Elaine filed last night, he said. Probate court, emergency guardianship petition. I set down my coffee and picked up the papers. A guardianship petition. I want to explain this clearly because the mechanics of it matter is a legal filing in which one party asks a court to declare another person incapable of managing their own affairs and to appoint a guardian to make financial and legal decisions on their behalf. It is a legitimate legal instrument that exists to protect genuinely vulnerable people. It is also in the hands of someone willing to abuse it, one of the most effective weapons available for stripping a person of autonomy while maintaining the appearance of concern. Elaine's petition was 42 pages long. I read it standing at the window, the winter light gray and flat against the glass, and with each page my jaw tightened another degree. The document described me as emotionally unstable, easily manipulated by outside parties prone to erratic decision-making, and incapable of responsibly managing a significant financial inheritance. It requested that Elaine herself be appointed as my financial guardian, pending a full psychological evaluation. Every single phrase used to describe me was a phrase I had heard from her mouth growing up, word for word. The specific vocabulary of 30 years of carefully administered diminishment, now formatted into legal language and submitted to a court. My hands were shaking not with fear, but with a fury so precise and so cold it felt almost like clarity. She had not simply invented a narrative to submit to a judge. She had spent decades building it, rehearsing it, installing it inside me like a slow infection, waiting for the moment she could use it. She's been preparing this for years, I said. My voice came out very controlled. The things she says about me in here, she has been saying them to me since I was a child. She manufactured the evidence before there was anything to manufacture it for. Yes, Robert said. He did not soften it. That is exactly what she did. I placed the petition on the table. I pressed my fingertips against the surface and breathed once deliberately. What do we do? I asked. Robert opened his briefcase. We respond, he said, aggressively and immediately. Robert's office looked different that morning. Not physically the same dark shelving, the same leather chairs, the same view of the street below through tall windows, but the atmosphere inside it had shifted entirely. The careful neutrality he had maintained for years was gone. In its place was something focused and deliberate, the specific energy of a person who has been waiting a very long time to stop pretending and start fighting. He spread the documents across the conference table in organized clusters, each group representing a different category of evidence, and walked me through them with the methodical precision of someone who had been building this case in his mind for years and was now simply transferring it to the physical world. First, he said, placing a bound folder in front of me, the intercepted correspondence. 41 letters written by your grandfather to you over 11 years, recovered from estate records along with documentation of their non-delivery. Each one establishes a pattern of deliberate isolation legally relevant to demonstrating coercive control. I pressed my fingertips hard against the table edge. The memory of reading those letters in the bank's private room was still raw enough to make my chest clench. Second, he placed a second folder beside the first, Email correspondence recovered from the family server Elaine's communications with various parties over a period of 8 years, documenting her systematic efforts to portray your grandfather as cognitively impaired to friends, family members, and one attempt directed toward his physician. He looked at me. Defamation and conspiracy to commit fraud. Third, a slim folder, this one marked with a compliance officer's stamp. Bank records. When Elaine attempted to pressure your grandfather into signing over financial authority 9 years ago, Cumberland National Trust's Compliance Department filed an internal suspicious activity report, a mandatory document under federal banking law, when staff observed signs of potential elder financial exploitation. That report names Elaine and Arthur by name. It has been preserved in the bank's legal records ever since. I stared at the folder. She tried to steal from him 9 years ago, and there's a federal record of it. There is, Robert said. It was never acted upon because your grandfather declined to pursue it at the time. He chose to wait. He set down the fourth folder, Julian's USB data, now formally documented and legally prepared. He was waiting for all of it to be ready at once. I looked at the table. 4 folders, 11 years of letters, 8 years of emails, 9 years of bank records, 3 months of keylogger data. She had spent decades building a case against me. My grandfather had spent decades building the truth. They thought they were cornering you, Robert said quietly. They were walking into something your grandfather built one careful piece at a time. He closed the last folder. Now we show them what it looks like from the other side. My jaw was tight, my eyes were burning. But underneath both of those things, something was rising that felt nothing like grief and nothing like fear. It felt like the beginning of justice. I spotted it the moment I stepped out of Robert's building. Dark sedan parked 30 feet to my left along the opposite curb, engine running, exhaust curling white in the winter air, windows tinted just dark enough to make the driver a shape rather than a person. It had not been there when I arrived 2 hours earlier. I knew this because I had developed in the past 48 hours the habit of noticing cars. I did not break stride. I walked to my own car, unlocked it, and sat down inside. Then I took out my phone and called Robert. He answered immediately. "What is it?" "Dark sedan across from your building," I said, keeping my voice level. "Running engine, tinted windows. It wasn't there when I came in." "Registration." I lifted my phone and took 3 photographs through the windshield, the vehicle, the plate, the street context establishing its position relative to Robert's office entrance. I sent them without being asked. 14 seconds of quiet. Then, "Private investigator. The vehicle is registered to a surveillance firm that operates under a shell company. We've flagged this registration before in similar cases." His voice tightened slightly. "Your mother is having you watched. She wants footage of you appearing distressed, irrational, or unstable, anything she can submit as supporting evidence for the guardianship petition." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The fury that moved through me was clean and cold, not the hot, panicked kind, the kind that sharpens your thinking rather than clouding it. "She wants me to perform for her camera," I said. "Essentially, yes." "Then I won't." I looked at the sedan in my rearview mirror. "Robert, whatever I do in a public space from this point forward, I want it documented on my end as well. Timestamps, locations, a record of my own behavior that contradicts anything she tries to submit." "Already arranged," he said. "I've retained an independent witness service, discrete, legally admissible documentation of your conduct and movements. It runs both ways. If they're building a record, we build a better one." I exhaled slowly. The sedan had not moved. It sat there patient and watchful, and I thought about the person behind those tinted windows pointing a camera at me and waiting for me to crack. I looked directly at the sedan in my mirror. I held the gaze for a count of 3, steady, unhurried, completely composed, and then I started my engine and pulled smoothly into traffic. She wanted evidence of a woman falling apart. What she was going to get was something else entirely. The envelope was propped against my hotel room door at 9:47 that evening. Plain white. No return address. No stamp. My name written across the front in handwriting I did not recognize, blocky, deliberate, the kind of script someone uses when they want to disguise their own. My stomach dropped the moment I saw it. I did not touch it immediately. I stood in the hallway and looked at it. And then I looked in both directions along the corridor, empty, fluorescent lit, the hum of an ice machine somewhere at the far end, the only sound. Whoever had left it was already gone. I took out my phone and photographed it in place, capturing the door number above it, and the timestamp on my camera establishing its location before I touched anything. Then I crouched down, picked it up by the corner, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of white paper. 4 words printed in the same blocky hand. Last chance. Call us. The fury that rose in me was immediate and physical, a heat in my chest and my throat and behind my eyes that I had to breathe through carefully to keep from spilling over. I photographed the note, sealed it back in the envelope, photographed the envelope again, and called Robert. Document everything you just did, he said, before I had finished describing it. The sequence, the timestamps, your exact actions. Then call Julian and find out where Marcus has been in the last 2 hours. I called Julian the moment Robert hung up. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting for my call. Marcus left the estate at 7:30. He said, his voice tight and clipped. He drove into the city. I tracked his location through the family account GPS, Arthur's car, which Marcus has been using. He was in the block surrounding your hotel between 8:15 and 9:30. A pause. Lena, they know exactly where you're staying. This wasn't a guess. My jaw tightened so hard it ached. The bank leak. Has to be, Julian said. Someone passed your hotel information along with your banking visit. Robert needs to know tonight. This is evidence of coordinated harassment, and it strengthens the case for an emergency protective order. A protective order, a legal directive from a court prohibiting specific individuals from contacting or approaching a person, required demonstrating a credible, documented pattern of threatening behavior. The envelope in my hand, combined with the surveillance sedan and the threatening emails, was building exactly that pattern. I'm calling Robert now, I said. Good, Julian said. His voice dropped. And Lena, lock your door tonight, both locks. I already had my hand on the deadbolt. I slept 4 hours and woke before dawn with my hand still close to the deadbolt, the habit of the night before apparently lodged somewhere in my nervous system. By 6:15, I was dressed, sitting at the small desk by the window with coffee, and my phone watching the street below gradually fill with morning traffic. The city moved with the indifference it always did. People walking cars, passing the ordinary machinery of a world that had no idea what was happening in a hotel room 4 floors above it. I had spent most of my life feeling invisible inside that indifference. This morning, it felt almost useful. My phone rang at 6:42. Julian. I found the leak, he said without preamble. His voice had the controlled, clipped quality it got when he was angry and working hard not to show it. There's a junior analyst at Cumberland National Trust. Mid-level access, handles account flag notifications. 3 days ago, your account triggered an activation alert when you authenticated the trust. Standard procedure, the system notifies relevant staff when a dormant legacy account goes active. He paused. This analyst forwarded that notification along with your hotel reservation information, which he accessed through a linked concierge service the bank offers premium clients to an external email address. That address traces back to a communications firm Elaine has used before. My coffee cup hit the desk harder than I intended. He sold my location to my mother. He violated federal banking privacy law. Julian set his jaw tight enough that I could hear it through the phone. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act prohibits financial institutions and their employees from disclosing non-public personal information to unauthorized third parties. This wasn't a gray area. He knew exactly what he was doing. A beat. I have the emails, all of them. The keylogger captured his outgoing correspondence from his work terminal. I pressed my free hand flat against the desk and breathed deliberately through my nose. The anger moving through me was large and specific, not the diffuse, exhausting fury of someone who has been hurt and doesn't know where to direct it, but the clean, targeted kind that comes from knowing exactly what happened and exactly who is responsible. Robert needs this immediately, I said. I'm sending it to him right now while we're talking, Julian said. But Lena, this matters beyond just the leak itself. It proves coordination. Elaine didn't stumble onto your location. She had an asset inside the bank positioned and ready before you ever walked through that door. She anticipated that you might go there. His voice dropped slightly. She's been planning this for a long time, much longer than we realized. The street below was fully light now, the pale winter sun flat against the buildings across from me. I thought about Elaine sitting somewhere in that estate patient and prepared with pieces in place I hadn't even known existed. She had built her plan over years. So had my grandfather. The one difference that mattered was that his pieces were built on truth, and hers were built on fear. Tell Robert I'll be at his office in an hour, I said. And Julian, thank you for all of it. Just finish it, he said quietly. That's all the thanks I need. Robert was waiting at his office door when I arrived. He had the particular stillness of someone who has just received significant information and is deciding how to present it. Not anxious, not dramatic, but deliberately composed in the way that told me he needed me to be steady for what came next. Julian's data arrived 20 minutes ago, he said, closing the door behind me. I've reviewed the emails. The evidence against the bank analyst is unambiguous. He moved to his desk and opened the laptop. And that confirmation triggered the second section of your grandfather's video. My breath caught. I sat down without being asked. Robert turned the screen toward me, pressed play, and stepped back to give me the room. My grandfather's face appeared. He looked different from the first recording filmed on a different day, judging by the angle of light through his study window sometime in the late afternoon rather than morning. He was sitting forward slightly in his chair, his hands clasped between his knees, and there was something in his expression I had not seen in the first section. Not urgency exactly. Something more like the specific relief of a person who has made a very difficult decision and made peace with it. Lena, he said. If you're watching this, it means they moved against you from inside the bank as well. I anticipated they might. I'm glad you found it. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was lower, more deliberate. I need to tell you something that may be hard to hear. I knew for the last 8 months of my life that your mother was altering my medication. I knew what it was designed to do, and I knew what the likely outcome was. His eyes held the camera steadily. I made a choice not to stop it. My hand flew to my mouth. I want to be clear about why, he said quickly, as though he had anticipated exactly that reaction. Not because I was ready to die, not because I had given up, but because I understood that if I exposed what Elaine was doing before everything was in place, before the trust was secured, before the evidence was documented, before Robert had everything he needed, she would simply find another way, a faster way, one I couldn't prepare for. He leaned forward slightly. I needed her to believe she was winning. I needed her to move slowly and confidently the way people do when they think they're in control. And I needed time to finish. My throat had closed completely. My eyes were burning so fiercely I could barely see the screen. The money is not the point, he said. I want you to understand that. The trust, the properties, the accounts, none of it is the point. The point is that you are free. Completely, legally, permanently free from people who spent 30 years trying to make you small. His voice softened. The wealth is just the vehicle, my dear. What I'm leaving you is a choice. The first real choice you've ever had. The screen went dark. I sat absolutely still for a long moment. Then a sound broke out of me, raw and jagged and entirely beyond my control, and I pressed both hands hard over my face and wept with the specific wrenching relief of someone who has just understood completely and finally that they were loved. Not used, not managed, not tolerated. Loved. Deliberately, carefully, at enormous personal cost. Robert placed a box of tissues on the desk beside me and said nothing, which was exactly right. The call came at 9:17 that evening, just as the last of the winter light had drained completely from the hotel room window, and the city outside had settled into its nighttime register, distant traffic. The occasional siren, the low and indifferent hum of a place that never fully stopped. I was sitting on the bed reviewing documents Robert had sent over when an unknown number appeared on my screen. Not a string of random characters like Elaine's threatening emails. A local number, ordinary looking, the kind attached to a prepaid phone purchased at a pharmacy counter by someone who needed to make a call that couldn't be traced back to them. I answered carefully. "Hello. Miss Lena." The voice was low and quick and unmistakable. "It's Margaret. Margaret Higgins. Please don't say my name out loud." My spine straightened. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, moving instinctively toward the window away from the door. "I hear you," I said. "Are you safe?" "For the moment." A brief pause, and I could hear her breathing, slightly elevated, controlled the way someone controls their breathing when they are frightened and refuse to show it. "I've been wanting to call you for days. I couldn't use the house phones. She monitors them." Another pause. "I need you to know what I have." My heart rate climbed. "Tell me." "The bottle," she said. "The original prescription bottle, the one she tampered with that night in December. I kept it. I sealed it myself with tape the morning after it happened before anyone else touched it, and I have kept it in a locked box in my room ever since." Her voice was very steady now, the steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times. "Dr. Marsh took the contents for analysis, but the bottle itself with the fingerprints on the inside of the cap, I have it. Nobody knows." My hand pressed flat against the cold glass of the window. Outside, the city glittered indifferent and bright. "Mrs. Higgins," I said carefully, "that is an extraordinarily important piece of evidence." "I know what it is," she said with a quiet firmness that made my chest ache. "I've known for months. I was afraid for a long time." Her voice dipped. "I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever she threatened me with, my son's insurance, my job, all of it, it doesn't matter as much as it did. Not after watching what she did to your grandfather." A breath. "Tell me what you need me to do, Miss Lena. I'll do it." My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my wrist against them hard. "Stay exactly where you are," I said. "Don't speak to anyone. Robert will call you in the morning. He'll arrange protection before you do anything else." "All right," she said quietly. "And Mrs. Higgins." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Thank you. For all of it. For that night in December most of all." A long pause. Then, "He was a good man," she said simply. "Good men deserve better. Good men deserve better." I carried those words with me into the next morning, into Robert's office, into the moment he placed a new set of documents on the conference table, and I saw the expression on his face, and understood before I read a single word that Elaine had escalated again. "She amended the petition," Robert said. "Filed at 7 this morning. She's added a criminal allegation." I picked up the top document. My eyes moved down the page and found the phrase immediately because it was the kind of phrase that jumps out of legal language the way a fire alarm jumps out of silence. Elder financial abuse. "Explain it to me," I said. My voice was flat and careful. "All of it." Robert sat down across from me. "Elder financial abuse is a criminal offense under federal law, specifically the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act, and under most state statutes. It refers to the illegal or improper use of an older person's funds, property, or assets, typically by someone in a position of trust." He met my eyes. Elaine is alleging that you manipulated your grandfather during a period of cognitive decline to alter his estate planning in your favor. The blood drained from my face. He was not cognitively declining. There is a physician's attestation in the will dated 3 months before his death certifying full competence. She is challenging the validity of that attestation, Robert said. Claiming the physician was influenced? He paused. And because the allegation is criminal rather than civil, it triggers an automatic referral to Adult Protective Services, the state agency responsible for investigating abuse of elderly individuals. APS operates independently of the courts. They can conduct their own investigation, interview witnesses, and submit findings that may influence the guardianship proceeding. I set the document down. My hands were not steady. She's trying to make me a criminal before we can make her one. Precisely, Robert said. It's a preemptive strike. If she generates enough institutional noise, a guardianship petition, a criminal allegation, an APS investigation running simultaneously, she controls the narrative. She buries our response under the sheer volume of her attack. His jaw tightened. It is a sophisticated strategy. I want you to understand that. She did not construct this alone or quickly. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow, the particular physical response of a person absorbing a blow they had not fully anticipated, even when they knew it was coming. I pressed both palms flat on the table and stared at them for a moment. Then I looked up at Robert. She wants volume, I said. Then we give the court something she can't bury, something so clear and so documented that no amount of noise covers it. Robert nodded slowly. That, he said, is exactly what we're going to do. The morning smelled like old coffee and photocopier toner. Robert's paralegal had already set 3 folders on the conference table by the time I walked through the door at 8:41, and the woman sitting across from us was not what I expected. Her name was Sandra Pollard. She introduced herself in a flat professional tone, Adult Protective Services field investigator assigned to my case 40 minutes ago, after the referral came through the county system overnight. She was around 50 with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a yellow legal pad already half filled with notes. She looked at me the way people look at a puzzle they are not sure they want to solve. Ms. Hargrove, she said, I want to be clear. My job is to determine whether exploitation occurred, not to take sides. Understood, I said. My hands were still in my lap. I did not let them move. Robert slid the first folder across the table before she could ask for it. Chain of custody documentation, he said. Toxicology analysis from a state-accredited forensic facility. Sample intake forms and release authorization signed by Dr. Eleanor Marsh, a licensed physician in this state. Sandra opened the folder and read without speaking. I watched her eyes move down the first page, then stop. This is dated 14 months ago, she said. Correct, Robert said. The evidence was collected and preserved before my client had any legal standing to act on it. The grandfather's estate attorney held it under seal until the trust was activated. Sandra turned to the second page. I could hear the central heating cycling on somewhere above us. My jaw was tight. I kept my breathing even. The second folder, Robert continued, contains a suspicious activity report filed by Cumberland National Trust 9 years ago under the Bank Secrecy Act. The report names 2 individuals who attempted to pressure the account holder into transferring financial authority. Both names appear in the guardianship petition filed yesterday. Sandra set down the first folder and reached for the second without being asked. I had spent the night memorizing these documents. Not to recite them, I could not have done that even if I tried. I had memorized them so that I would not look afraid when someone else read them for the first time. She was on the 3rd page when her pen finally moved. You said a licensed housekeeper witnessed the medication substitution, she said. Yes, I said. Her name is Margaret Higgins. She has been employed at the Hargrove estate for 19 years. Robert has already arranged for her formal statement to be taken this afternoon under supervised conditions. Sandra wrote something, underlined it, and looked up. "I will need to speak with her directly," she said. "We expected that," Robert said. "She is ready." Sandra closed the folder. She looked at me again, the same careful measuring look as before, but something in it had shifted. She was no longer reading a complaint. She was reading a record. She uncapped her pen a second time. "All right," she said. "Let's go through this from the beginning." We went through it from the beginning, and it took 4 hours. By 2 in the afternoon, Robert had moved the session to a formal conference room on the 3rd floor of his building, a room with a court reporter, a video camera mounted on a tripod, and 2 attorneys on the opposite side of the table. The woman sitting across from Margaret Higgins was named Claire Sutton Elaine's retained counsel, who arrived with a leather portfolio and associate beside her, and the particular kind of patience that comes from believing you are going to win. Margaret sat at the near end of the table in a dark blue cardigan. Her hands were folded in front of her. When I had seen her in the hallway before the session began, she had gripped my arm and said very quietly, "I know what I saw. That's all I need to know." Her voice had not shaken once. Robert placed a sealed evidence bag on the table at the start of the session. Inside, it was a small amber prescription bottle, its label still intact, its cap sealed with a strip of clear tape Margaret had applied the night she discovered the substitution. He identified it for the record exhibit, a physical evidence item collected in December of the prior year, stored in a locked container at the residence transferred to the custody of Dr. Eleanor Marsh on the date specified in the intake form. Claire leaned forward. "Mrs. Higgins," she said, "you are not a medical professional. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Margaret said. "And you are not a licensed pharmacist?" "No." "So when you claim to have identified a substitution in a prescription bottle, you are basing that entirely on personal observation. No training, no certification." Margaret's chin came up slightly. "I have managed that household for 19 years, she said. "I know what Mr. Hargrove's medication looked like. The capsules in that bottle were a different color and a different size. I photographed them before I sealed the bottle. The photographs are dated." Claire paused. She had not expected the photographs. Robert slid a second folder across the table. "Time-stamped digital images," he said, "taken on the night in question. Metadata confirmed by forensic analysis. The images correspond exactly to the contents of Exhibit A." The court reporter's fingers moved steadily across the keys. The video camera's red light held without blinking. Claire turned a page in her portfolio. She adjusted her approach the way a person adjusts their footing on uneven ground, carefully without letting the effort show. "Mrs. Higgins, were you aware that your employment at the estate could be terminated at any time?" "Yes," Margaret said. "I was aware of that when I sealed the bottle, too." No one spoke for a moment. The red light on the camera kept recording. That recording light had been burning for 3 hours when the session shifted. Robert waited until Claire had finished her cross-examination of the physical exhibit before he reached into the second case file and produced a sealed forensic drive, a matte black rectangle no larger than a thumb, logged and labeled in the custody chain as Exhibit B. He set it on the table with the same unhurried precision he applied to everything, and I watched Claire's associate lean over and whisper something into her ear. "Exhibit B," Robert said, addressing the court reporter directly, "is a forensic copy of a USB storage device recovered from a confidential source. The original device was submitted to a certified digital forensics laboratory. The lab's chain of custody documentation certification number and examiner credentials are attached as Exhibit B1 through B4. Claire picked up the documentation without being invited to. Her eyes moved fast. "Your source," she said. "You're not disclosing the identity." "The source has submitted a sworn declaration," Robert said. "The declaration is sealed pending a protective order application filed this morning. The identity is known to the court." Claire set the papers down. The data on this drive you're claiming it captures internal communications from the Hargrove household network, from an external account registered to a shell entity, Robert said. 3 months of outbound transmissions. The forensic examiner's report documents the method of capture, the integrity hash of the original file, and a verified match between the copy and the original. The examiner will be available for testimony. I kept my hands flat on the table. The room felt very still, the kind of still that happens not when nothing is moving, but when everyone in it is holding something back at once. Claire turned to a fresh page. "The method of capture," she said. "Monitoring software, is that correct? Installed on a device the source had authorized access to," Robert said. "Authorized by whom? By the account holder of record at the time of installation." Claire's pen did not move. She was working something out behind her eyes, and I could see the exact moment she realized that the answer did not help her. "The account holder," she said slowly, "was your client's grandfather." "Correct," Robert said. He reached into his jacket and placed a single folded document on the table. A photocopy edges worn the signature at the bottom in dark ink that had bled slightly into the paper over years. He executed a written network monitoring authorization covering all devices registered to the household account. Dated and witnessed 8 years ago. His estate attorney held the original. Claire looked at it for a long moment. I had memorized what came next. Robert had walked me through every sequence the night before, but watching it land in a room full of people encountering it for the first time was not the same as knowing it was coming. My chest tightened the way it does, just before something breaks open. Claire closed her portfolio. She did not ask another question for 4 full minutes. Those 4 minutes ended when Claire's associate passed her a folded note. She read it once, set it face down on the table, and requested a recess. Robert nodded. I followed him into the hallway, and the moment the conference room door closed behind us, he turned to face me with the expression of someone who had been expecting exactly this. "She's going to file a suppression motion," he said. "Emergency basis. She'll argue the monitoring software violated federal communications privacy law, that capturing outbound transmissions without the sender's knowledge constitutes an unlawful interception." "Can she win that?" I asked. "Not with the written authorization on the table," he said. "The grandfather's documented consent covers the capture method. Her argument collapses against it. But filing the motion buys her time, and time is what she's after." I nodded. My jaw was tight. The hallway was quiet except for the low hum of the building's ventilation system and the muffled sound of voices from another floor. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The number was one I did not recognize, but the phrasing was unmistakable. Flat, deliberate, and designed to land like a hand around the throat. "You are making a serious mistake. There is still time to walk away from this with something. Keep pushing, and you will end up with nothing. Think carefully." My pulse jumped hard behind my sternum. I read it twice. Then I turned the screen toward Robert without a word. He looked at it for 3 full seconds. His jaw tightened, the first crack in his composure I had seen all day, and then the stillness came back harder than before. "Screenshot it," he said. "Timestamp visible, then forward it to my direct line immediately." I did both before he finished the sentence. "That message," he said, his voice dropping to something precise and quiet, "was sent during an active legal proceeding in which the sender's family holds a direct financial interest under federal statute that constitutes attempted witness tampering. It does not matter that it came from an unregistered number. The language is unambiguous. The timing is documented, and we have the metadata." "What does filing do?" I asked. "It creates a formal record the court cannot ignore at the next hearing," he said. "Every move they make from this point forward will be reviewed against it. The pressure they applied in that hallway just became evidence against them." I slid my phone back into my pocket. My hands were steady. I was not entirely sure how, but they were. Arthur has never understood that paper remembers everything, I said. Robert looked at me for a moment. He's about to learn it. The conference room door opened. Claire's associate leaned into the hallway and said they were ready to reconvene. Robert straightened his jacket, picked up his files, and walked toward the door without hesitation. I followed him, and I did not look back. And when I sat down at the conference table again, the room felt subtly different. The same chairs, the same overhead light, the same camera on its tripod. But the weight of it had shifted in a way I could not have described precisely and did not need to. Robert placed the original authorization document on the table before he sat down. He did not announce it. He simply set it there in the center of the table where everyone could see it and let it speak for itself. For the record, he said, I am introducing a written network monitoring authorization executed by Silas Hargrove, notarized and independently witnessed dated 8 years prior to today's proceeding. This document is entered as Exhibit C. Claire looked at it without reaching for it, which told me she had already known it was coming, and had spent the recess deciding how to respond to something she could not stop. The document predates the conduct in question by several years, she said. The relevance to is directly established, Robert said. The authorization covers all devices registered to the household network account during the period captured in Exhibit B. The forensic examiner's report cross-references the specific device identifiers against the account registration records. They match precisely. The account holder's consent was given freely in writing before a notary and has never been revoked. The presiding adjudicator, a retired federal magistrate Robert had retained as a neutral third party for the deposition session, looked at the document without speaking. She was a small woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a thin chain, and she had said very little all afternoon. When she spoke, her voice was deliberate and unhurried, the voice of someone who has made rulings for long enough that the weight of them no longer shows on her face. The motion to suppress is denied, she said. Exhibit B is admitted into the record. Exhibit C is admitted. Both rulings will be reflected in the transcript. I felt it before I fully understood it, a loosening somewhere behind my ribs, slow and deep, like a knot pulled tight for so long I had stopped registering the pressure until the moment it began to release. Robert made a small notation in the margin of his file. He did not smile. He did not look at me. He did not need to. Claire touched the edge of her portfolio with 2 fingers, a small contained gesture that might have meant nothing to anyone else in the room. But I had spent my entire life watching people manage their expressions under pressure, and I knew exactly what it looked like when someone was deciding how much of a loss to let show. She was deciding to show none of it. That was fine. The record had already shown it for her. And there was nothing left in that room that required me to stay. The session ended at 4:52. Robert gathered his files with the same systematic calm he had maintained for 8 straight hours, thanked the presiding officer, and shook hands with Claire's associate. Claire herself had already gone, which told its own story without needing to be told. I stood by the window while the room cleared around me, looking down at the street below, watching people move through the late afternoon cold, with their collars turned up and their heads bent forward, carrying the ordinary weight of ordinary days. I had forgotten what that felt like. I was not sure I had ever fully known it. Robert appeared beside me. I'm filing the supplemental declaration before 5, he said. The threatening message from the recess goes into the record as a separate exhibit. When a party with a direct financial stake in active proceedings contacts the opposing party during those proceedings and uses language designed to discourage their continued participation, that falls under the federal obstruction statute. Filing the declaration means the court has a formal record of it. Every future motion they bring will be evaluated against that record. So the pressure they applied today became a liability, I said. Every move they make from this point forward, he said, will be read in that light. He left to make the filing. I stayed at the window another few minutes, my forehead almost touching the glass, the cold radiating through it against my skin. My feet ached. My shoulders ached. The back of my neck had been tight since 7 in the morning, and I had stopped noticing it somewhere around noon. My phone rang at 5:19. The name on the screen was Victoria Hargrove. She was 70 years old, Silas's younger sister, the woman who had kept his private correspondence and sealed records for 11 years in a house on the east side of the city, the woman who had handed me a box of letters I had not yet finished reading. She called rarely. When she called, it meant something. I answered. "I need you to listen carefully," she said. Her voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something wound tight, urgency or anticipation or both, pressed together. The second video segment. Silas said it would unlock when you had made enough progress. I received an automated notification from the estate server an hour ago. It is open. My hand tightened around the phone. Already, the system flagged today's session as the qualifying event, she said. Silas built procedural triggers into the estate server, specific legal milestones that would release each segment when reached. Today, I met the threshold. I turned away from the window. The room was empty now. Chairs pushed back the recording equipment, dark and silent. "Send it to Robert tonight," I said. "Already done," Victoria said. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." I stood in that empty room and felt something larger than relief. The specific sensation of a plan that was bigger than me continuing to move forward exactly as it had been designed to. That sensation of a plan moving forward exactly as designed stayed with me through the drive back to Robert's office, through the elevator, through the quiet hallway, where the last paralegal was pulling on her coat and nodding goodnight. It stayed with me until Robert set his laptop on the cleared conference table, dimmed the overhead light, and pressed play. The room was very still. The only light came from the screen and the low lamp in the corner, and in that half-dark, my grandfather appeared the same way he had in the first segment, seated in a high-backed chair, hands folded in his lap, the space behind him deliberately plain. He looked directly into the camera with the unhurried certainty of a man who has already made every decision that matters. "If you are watching this," he said, "then you have done something difficult today, and you are still standing. That is all I needed to know." My throat tightened. I did not look away from the screen. "There is something I kept out of the trust documents," he continued. "Not because I overlooked it, because I could not afford for it to be found before you were in a position to protect it." He paused the way he had always paused before saying something he needed to be sure was heard. 11 years ago, I transferred a portfolio of real estate holdings into a separate limited liability company. The company has its own registration, its own tax filings, its own management structure. It does not appear in the trust records because it was never legally required to. A limited liability company is a distinct legal entity. What it holds belongs to it alone, not to any trust or estate. Only to whoever controls it. Beside me, Robert leaned forward slightly. I heard him exhale through his nose. "The company is called Hargrove Land Partners," my grandfather said. "I am its sole member. Upon my death, sole membership transfers to you automatically by the terms of the operating agreement I drafted and had witnessed 10 years ago. You do not need to go to court. You do not need to file anything new. You only need to present the operating agreement and the death certificate to the registered agent, and it is yours." He looked into the camera for a long moment before continuing. "The portfolio contains 14 properties," he said. "Their combined assessed value at the time of this recording was approximately $22 million. I expect it is considerably higher now." I pressed my palm flat against the table because I needed to feel something solid beneath my hand. "I kept it separate," he said quietly, "because the people watching what I had built were watching the trust. They were not watching everything. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there was still something left that was entirely and only yours. The screen went dark. Robert sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. 22 million, he said. Minimum. I nodded. My eyes were burning, but I did not let them close. My eyes were burning, but I did not let them close, and by 7 the following morning I was already in Robert's car with a folder on my lap, and the address of the registered agent's office on my phone screen. Robert explained the mechanics as he drove in the same measured way he explained everything, not for the sake of hearing himself talk, but because he understood that I needed to know exactly what I was walking into. When a limited liability company names a successor member in its founding documents, that transfer is governed by contract, not by probate. There is no court filing. There is no waiting period. There is no public notice requirement. One member ceases to exist. The documents establish who comes next. The registered agent updates the company record. It is a private transaction, and it moves precisely as fast as the paperwork allows. We were in and out in 40 minutes. The woman behind the desk was a paralegal named Diane, reading glasses on a beaded chain, efficient and unhurried in the way of someone who has processed this kind of document many times and finds nothing unusual in it. She verified our papers against the file already held in their system, stamped 3 copies, and handed me a countersigned membership certificate without ceremony. I held it with both hands in the elevator on the way back down, and read my own name printed on it twice slowly, the way you read something you are not yet certain is real. It was real. It had always been real. It had simply been waiting for me to be ready to receive it. Robert's phone rang before we reached the lobby. He listened for 30 seconds, said, "Thank you," and ended the call. His expression had not changed, but there was a new quality to his stillness, the kind that means information has arrived and is being immediately assessed. "Ye, Julian," he said. "Elaine ran a county property record search late last night. Every property held by a company is registered with the county assessor under that company's name. It is public record available to anyone who knows how to look. She found 14 listings registered to the same entity. She knows the company exists." I processed that. "What time?" Julian's log shows the search at 11:47 last night, which meant she had found it before we completed the transfer this morning, which meant she had spent the night knowing something was moving beyond her reach and had been unable to do anything but watch. "She called Claire Sutton at 6:15 this morning." Robert continued. "Julian tracked the outbound call, 12 minutes. We stepped out of the elevator into the lobby. Morning light came through the glass entrance in long, pale strips across the floor. I tucked the certificate into the folder and held it firmly against my side. "Then we move, before she files?" I said. Robert held the door open. "We already have," he said. "And she doesn't have what you're holding." She didn't have what I was holding, and by 2 that afternoon she was trying to take it anyway. The motion arrived at Robert's office at 1:58:41 pages emergency designation, arguing that the LLC membership transfer should be voided on grounds of undue influence. The legal theory required Claire to prove that Silas had not been acting freely when he drafted the documents naming me as his successor. It required her to demonstrate that at the moment of signing, someone had pressured him, manipulated him, overridden his independent judgment. Robert read it at his desk while I sat across from him. He turned pages steadily, marking the margins with a pencil, his expression the same as it always was, attentive, unreadable, already 3 moves ahead. "She has 2 problems," he said without looking up. "The first is the date. The founding documents were executed 10 years ago. To sustain an undue influence claim, she must show that the pressure occurred at or near the time of signing. 10 years ago, you had no involvement in your grandfather's business affairs. There is no mechanism by which you could have exerted influence over a document you did not know existed. And the second problem, I said. He set down the motion and reached for his laptop. He turned the screen toward me and cued the recording to a specific moment, my grandfather looking directly into the camera, hands folded, voice unhurried and clear. He pressed play. I kept it separate because the people watching what I had built were watching the trust. They were not watching everything. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there was still something left that was entirely and only yours. Robert stopped the playback. A man stating in his own recorded words the deliberate and independent reasoning behind a legal structure he established a decade earlier. Verified metadata on the recording. 2 independent witnesses named in the notarization block, both living, both contacted by my office, and prepared to provide statements. I looked at the paused image on the screen, my grandfather's face, mid-sentence, the lines around his eyes, deep and familiar, and unchanged. She cannot win this, I said. Not on these facts, Robert said. He closed the laptop. I filed the response this morning. The motion will be heard tomorrow. It will not survive. He was right. The ruling came at 11. The following morning, a single paragraph, precise and final, denying the motion in full. The adjudicator cited the age of the documents, the corroborating evidence of sound mind and deliberate intent, and the complete absence of any factual basis connecting Lena to the company's formation. I read it, standing in the hallway outside Robert's office, my back against the wall, the paper held in both hands. The architecture my grandfather had built across 11 years of careful, quiet preparation was holding. Every beam of it, every joint, every piece he had placed when no one was watching. All of it was holding. All of it was holding, and 3 days later, so was the criminal case. Robert called me at 7:41 in the morning, before I had finished my first cup of coffee, and his voice had the particular quality it carried when he was delivering information he had been waiting to deliver for some time. The district attorney's office filed this morning, he said. Grand jury returned the indictment yesterday evening. 3 counts each: attempted murder in the second-degree, fraud in the first degree, and elder financial abuse under the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act. Elaine and Arthur have both been processed. I set down my cup. The room was very quiet around me. Processed, I said. Arraigned at 6 this morning. Both entered not guilty pleas, which is standard. Bail was set and posted within the hour. They are not in custody, but they are formally charged, and the conditions of their release prohibit contact with you, with any witness named in the proceedings, and with any asset connected to the Hargrove estate. I absorbed that in silence for a moment. Attempted murder in the second degree requires the prosecution to demonstrate that a person intentionally took action designed to cause another person's death without premeditation rising to the level of first degree. The toxicology evidence, the chain of custody from Mrs. Higgins through Dr. Eleanor Marsh, and the forensic laboratory results establish the poisoning as deliberate and targeted. Fraud in the first degree covered the years of financial misrepresentation, the forged authorizations, and the attempts to seize control of the trust through deception. The elder financial abuse count addressed the sustained campaign against Silas, directly a federal charge carrying significant sentencing weight under the statute designed specifically to protect vulnerable adults from exploitation by family members. 3 counts, each of them with a paper trail, 11 years in the making. How did they respond? I asked. Claire Sutton issued a statement on their behalf, Robert said. Standard language: her clients maintain their innocence. They intend to vigorously defend against all charges. They are confident in the justice system. He paused. She did not sound confident. I walked to the window. The morning outside was gray and cold, the street below still mostly empty at this hour. A woman walked a dog along the far sidewalk, unhurried, her breath making small clouds in the air. I had spent years in that house watching my grandfather grow smaller and quieter under the weight of what was being done to him. I had spent years telling myself I was imagining it, that I was wrong, that families did not do such things deliberately. I had been wrong about being wrong. "When is the guardianship hearing?" I asked. "4 days," Robert said, "and now the court has the indictment on record when it convenes." I turned away from the window. "Good," I said. Good, I had said, and I had meant it in a way that had nothing to do with satisfaction and everything to do with readiness. The hearing convened at 9 on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom on the 4th floor of the county probate building, a room that smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax, with tall windows that let in flat winter light and wooden benches that creaked when anyone shifted their weight. The presiding judge was the Honorable Patricia Okafor, a woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair, and the measured attention of someone who had heard every variation of every family dispute that money could generate and was not impressed by any of them. Robert and I sat at the respondents' table. Claire sat across the aisle with her associate and 2 additional attorneys I did not recognize, which told me the petition was being treated as high-stakes litigation rather than routine family law. Elaine and Arthur were present in the gallery behind their counsel, dressed carefully, their expressions arranged into something between concern and dignity. I did not look at them directly. I did not need to. Claire opened for the petitioners. Her argument was structured and professionally delivered. Lena Hargrove had demonstrated a pattern of erratic behavior, had made unilateral decisions regarding a significant estate. Without family consultation, had shown hostility toward family members attempting to ensure proper management of assets. She cited my refusal to sign the power of attorney document, my unannounced visits to the bank, my engagement of private legal counsel without informing the family. She framed each of these as evidence of impaired judgment. Judge Okafor listened without expression. Robert rose when Claire finished. He did not begin with an argument. He began with documents. He submitted the toxicology report and the forensic analysis of the prescription bottle, first explaining their origin and custody in 3 precise sentences. He submitted the suspicious activity report filed by Cumberland National Trust 9 years ago, naming Elaine and Arthur by their legal names, cross-referenced against their names on the current petition. He submitted the criminal indictment returned 4 days ago, 3 counts, 2 defendants, both of whom were seated in this courtroom. He set each document on the clerk's desk without raising his voice. Judge Okafor picked up the indictment and read it. She read it for longer than any other document Robert had submitted, and when she set it down, she looked at the petitioner's table with an expression that was not anger and was not surprise, and was not anything. I had a clean word for the expression of someone confirming something they had already suspected before they walked into the room. "Counsel," she said to Claire, "your clients are the subject of an active criminal indictment related directly to the estate at issue in this petition." Claire's response was measured and immediate. "Your Honor, the indictment is unproven." "It is on the record," Judge Okafor said. The room went very still. "It is on the record," Judge Okafor had said, and those 6 words had settled into the courtroom like something structural, not dramatic, not loud, but load-bearing in the way that certain statements are once they have been spoken aloud by the right person in the right room. Robert called Margaret Higgins to the stand 20 minutes later. She walked to the witness box with her hands at her sides and her back straight, wearing the same dark blue cardigan she had worn to the deposition. She was 63 years old and had worked in that house since she was 44, and she sat down in the witness chair with the composure of someone who has already decided long before this moment exactly how much she is willing to endure and exactly how far she is willing to go. Robert led her through the sequence methodically. The night she noticed the capsules, the color difference, the size difference, the way she had held the bottle under the bathroom light for a long time before she was certain of what she was seeing. The photographs she had taken on her personal phone before she resealed the bottle with clear tape. The locked box in her room where she had kept the bottle for the weeks that followed. The call to Dr. Eleanor Marsh, a licensed physician she had contacted independently, who had collected a sample under documented conditions and submitted it to a state-accredited forensic laboratory. She answered each question in complete sentences without elaboration and without hesitation. When Robert finished, Claire stood. "Mrs. Higgins," she said, "you testified that you noticed a color difference in the capsules. Is it possible you were mistaken? Pharmaceutical manufacturers sometimes alter the appearance of medications between production batches." "I considered that," Margaret said. "That is why I photographed them before I did anything else. But you are not a pharmacist. You have no training in medication identification." "I am not," Margaret said. "I am someone who filled that prescription bottle from the same pharmacy every month for 6 years. I know what those capsules looked like." "And you made this determination alone in a bathroom at night?" "Yes," Margaret said. "Under a good light." One of the attorneys at the petitioner's table wrote something on a legal pad. I watched Claire recalibrate the small pause, the slight shift in the angle of her body, and I recognized the moment she decided to change direction. "You stated you were concerned about your employment," Claire said. "Isn't it possible that your testimony today is motivated by a desire to secure your position with the new estate administrator?" Margaret looked at her steadily. "I sealed that bottle before anyone knew there was going to be a new administrator," she said. "I didn't know what would happen. I only knew what I saw." Judge Okafor leaned forward slightly in her chair. She did not look away from Margaret for the rest of the cross-examination. And when Claire finally said she had no further questions, the silence that followed had a different texture than the silences before it. Heavier, more settled, the kind that forms when a room has collectively reached a conclusion it has not yet spoken aloud. Margaret stepped down from the witness box and returned to her seat without looking at the petitioner's table. I watched her fold her hands in her lap and fix her gaze forward, and I felt something tighten behind my sternum that was not grief and was not anger, but was something close to both the particular ache of watching someone carry weight they should never have been asked to carry, and carry it with more dignity than the people who put it on them. Robert rose for his final submission. He did not argue emotion. He did not argue character. He laid 3 documents on the clerk's desk and addressed the court in the same measured register he had used all morning. "Your Honor," he said, "I draw the court's attention to the applicable state statute governing inheritance rights in cases of intentional harm. The Slayer rule codified in this jurisdiction provides that a person who intentionally and feloniously causes the death or serious bodily harm of another may not inherit from or otherwise benefit from the estate of that person. The rule exists to prevent an individual from profiting from their own wrongdoing against the person whose estate they seek to claim." He paused. "The petitioners in this matter are the subjects of an active criminal indictment that includes charges of attempted murder and fraud, both arising directly from conduct directed at the estate holder, whose assets they are now petitioning this court to place under their control. The criminal proceedings have not concluded, and the statute's full application awaits the outcome of those proceedings. However, the court is entitled to note the statute's potential applicability in evaluating whether granting the petition would be consistent with its underlying legal purpose." Judge Okafor looked at the documents. She looked at the petitioner's table. Elaine's expression had not changed. She was still arranged into that careful posture of concerned dignity, but something behind her eyes had shifted and I could see it from across the room. Claire stood. "Your Honor, the criminal proceedings are unproven and separate from the indictment is in evidence," Judge Okafor said. "I have read it." Claire sat down. The judge wrote something on the document in front of her. She wrote for longer than a marginal note would require. When she looked up, her expression was not unkind, but it was final in the way that certain expressions are when the person wearing them has already decided. "The petition for emergency guardianship," she said, "is denied in its entirety." I did not move. I did not make a sound. I let the words exist in the room for a moment before I let myself believe them. I let the words exist in the room for a moment before I let myself believe them, and then I believed them, and the believing was not triumphant, it was quiet and vast and slightly difficult to breathe through. The written ruling arrived at Robert's office the following morning. 14 pages, precise and unambiguous, the petition denied the evidence against the petitioners noted formally in the record, the Hargrove Legacy Trust, and all associated holdings confirmed under my sole legal authority with immediate effect. Robert set it on the desk in front of me without ceremony, the way he set everything down, and waited while I read it. I read every page. When I finished, I set it down and looked at my hands for a moment. They were steady. I was not entirely sure when that had become the default, but it had. Robert reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and produced a small wooden box I had not seen before. He set it beside the ruling. "Your grandfather left this with me 11 years ago," he said, "to be given to you when the trust was fully secured. Not before." I opened the box. Inside, on a fold of dark cloth, was the copper ring, the same ring Silas had pressed into my palm at the reading of the will, the one engraved with the words I had carried in my chest for months. Beside it was a single envelope, unsealed, my name, written on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. I picked up the letter. It was 1 page. He had written it by hand, and the lines were even and deliberate, the pen pressure firm. He told me he was sorry for the years I had spent doubting what I knew to be true. He told me he had watched me from as close as he could manage, and from further away than he could bear. He told me the money was not the point, it had never been the point. The point was that I would have something no one could take from me, not because of its value, but because of what reaching it required me to understand about myself. The last line read, "You were never the one who needed saving. I just needed to make sure you had time to remember that." I folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands. Robert looked out the window. He did not speak, which was the kindest thing he could have done. Outside, the winter light was thin and pale and very clear, the kind of light that makes everything look exactly as it is. No softer, no harsher, just true. I sat with that for a long time. And then I stood up, and that was how it began. Not with ceremony, not with a ruling or a phone call or a document delivered across a desk. It began with standing up from a chair in a lawyer's office on a gray winter afternoon and walking out into the cold with no particular place I was required to be. I had forgotten what that felt like. I drove back to the hotel, a mid-range place near Robert's office with a coffee maker on the desk and a window facing the parking structure. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room. Beige walls, beige carpet, curtains the color of something that had once been given a more optimistic name. I had barely noticed any of it while I was fighting. Now I noticed all of it. I ordered soup from the restaurant downstairs and ate it at the desk by the window. Outside, evening was settling in, streetlights coming on one by one, a few cars moving slowly through the lot below. A man in a red coat walked a large dog with the unhurried patience of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. I watched him until he turned the corner. The letter from my grandfather was still in my coat pocket. I did not take it out. I had read it enough times that I could feel the shape of every sentence without seeing the words. You were never the one who needed saving. I had believed the opposite for so long. Not loudly, quietly, persistently, the way a wrong assumption operates when it has been load-bearing long enough to become invisible. I turned off the lamp. Through the window, the parking lot lights burned steady and orange against the dark. Sleep came without a fight, and when I woke, I knew immediately where I needed to go. I drove to the estate in the early gray of a Wednesday morning, arriving before 8, when the frost had not yet lifted from the grass along the front path. The gate opened on the code I had always known but rarely used. It had never felt like mine to use before. It felt like mine now. I went inside. The rooms were cold and quiet, the heating set low during the proceedings. My footsteps echoed on the hallway floor. I walked through the sitting room, the corridor, and into my grandfather's study, and I let the silence be large, rather than trying to fill it. My phone buzzed once. Robert trial date set for April. Plea discussions have begun. I read it and put the phone away. The desk was as he had left it, papers stacked, a pen laid parallel to the edge, a framed photograph in the corner I had passed 100 times without truly seeing. I picked it up now. It was the two of us. I was perhaps 7 years old, sitting on the front steps in summer light, squinting at the camera. He was beside me, one hand resting lightly on my shoulder, looking not at the camera but at me, with an expression I had no word for as a child and had a precise word for now. I turned it over. On the back, in his handwriting, she already knows. She just doesn't know what she knows yet. I stood at his desk in the cold, quiet room and held him for a long time. I stood at his desk in the cold, quiet room and held it for a long time, and then I set it down and walked outside. The steps were cold beneath my feet. The air was sharp but not cruel. Late February light, thin and clear, the kind that shows everything exactly as it is, without softening or distorting anything. I sat down on the top step and took the copper ring from my coat pocket. The engraving caught the light. Only use it when you have absolutely no one left to trust. I read the words the way you read something that has finished its work. Not for instruction anymore. For memory. For the kind of gratitude that has grief wound through it so completely the two cannot be pulled apart. I had used it exactly as he intended. I had waited until there was no one left, and in that waiting I had discovered there were people left after all, not the ones I had believed were mine by blood, but real ones. Ones who showed up when something true was at stake. Down the path beyond the gate, the street was filled with ordinary morning sounds. A car engine turning over. A door closing somewhere. The city moved through its Wednesday without reference to anything that had happened here. I did not know exactly what came next. I knew I would find out. I knew I had everything required, not because of the money or the properties or the papers filed in courtrooms across the city, but because of what reaching all of it had asked me to remember about myself. I stood up. I closed my fingers around the ring and put it back in my pocket. I walked down the steps and through the gate. I did not look back. Standing before the gates of the old estate, I realized that the truth is not just a weapon, but a burden that not everyone is strong enough to carry. Looking back at this tearful journey, I understand that family betrayal is the hardest kind of wound to heal, because it comes from those we once would have given our lives for. The greatest lesson I've learned is this: never place your entire faith in people. Place it in the justice of God. I was once too naive only to fall into a spiral of family betrayal, pushed out into the freezing winter night by my own biological parents. My sincere advice to you: don't be like me. Don't wait until you are empty-handed to learn how to be cautious. Stay vigilant and protect yourself before a family betrayal scenario has the chance to happen in your own life. My perspective is clear. Forgiveness is a luxury, and justice is what helps us survive. A family revenge does not necessarily have to be violent. Your brilliant success and absolute freedom are the strongest strikes back. Don't let hatred consume you, but don't let the wicked go unpunished either. Turn your pain into the motivation for a family revenge that is civilized and courageous. Ultimately, true family revenge is when you stand firm on your own 2 feet, no longer under anyone's manipulation.